right, and good morning, everyone. This is Dreaming Crow, also known as Somnus Dreadraven, coming back to my channel. Again, good morning. It is the 23rd of May, and it is approximately 7:04 a.m. Pretty much been up all night. For those of you that are probably just waking up, you may be receiving notifications of my part 1 to this video that I am making. This is currently part 2 that I am recording, which is Satan, Christianity's greatest lie to the world. Okay, at least that is my personal opinion in the matter, and I am here to discuss biblical passages regarding that, and hopefully to provide a little bit of historical fact behind that, and some opinions as far as why I believe that. Certainly not everyone will believe that, especially Christians for that matter. But, you know, to each their own, you know. I certainly believe that Christianity provided people of the occult community, as well as those of left-hand path practice, their greatest ally when it comes to performing ritual magic and just about anything else, and that would include, that would be Satan in particular, which I will be concluding in my discussion as far as, you know, why I believe that. So in this part, I will be discussing 4 biblical passages that the term Satan, or the Satan in some cases, actually refer to celestial beings or angels within the court of God, and how the term was used to describe them as an adversary or an accuser, either towards a particular individual or even God himself, okay, in one particular case. So in the first part, I did discuss 6 individual instances where Satan, or again, the meaning of the word, the adversary or the accuser, was used to represent individuals or people within the Bible. And again, this part is simply to discuss celestial beings, those that are or were under the service of the court of God, or you know, that either did his bidding for him. So in the first case, we have Numbers 22 chapter and verse 22. This one is actually kind of a long story for you to kind of like understand the actual story behind it. You have to kind of read actually verses 22 through 35, and again, these verses that I am using are coming out of the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, okay? And for those of you that want to be able to go and read those passages for yourself, you can go to www.gateway, let's see, just to make sure I get this right. I don't want to give you the incorrect address for those that want to look it up. And sorry, almost there. Got to scroll down to my end of my paper here. I've written about 37 pages out of notes that I need to scroll through a little bit. Okay. So www.biblegateway.com, and on that main page, you're going to click on versions. Go down to the English version and scroll down till you find new Revised Standard Version of the Bible in English, and you'll be able to look these passages up. Again, you can of course use whichever Bible version you'd like, but by using a different version than what I am presenting here, you may get different interpretations or different styles of writing that may or may not actually match up with what I'm presenting here. So I just want to make sure that that is understood. And I got to scroll back to where I need to be. All right, so Numbers chapter 22, verses 22 through 35. And of course, this is a story of, some of us may be familiar with this, the talking donkey that the individual Balaam is riding. And Balaam travels with a group of men from Moab who wish to attack Israel, and this angers God. And in this instance, God sends an angel bearing a sword to block their path. And of course, the angel is invisible to everybody except the donkey in the story, okay? And the donkey, you notice, as the angel in 3 different occasions, and either steers out of the path of the angel or vice versa, moves out of the way. And on each account, Balaam strikes the donkey for its actions. He's not feeling it. He doesn't know that the angel there is blocking the path. And then, so God comes through and speaks through the donkey and says, "Hey, why are you beating this animal? He saved your life 3 separate times." And then at that point, the angel appears, and Balaam professes, his sins for what he did. So it's a very lengthy passage. I'm not going to end up quoting everything here, but I will include all of the verses at the end of this video so that you could go ahead and read those yourself. Okay. But I do want to point out one particular instance. Okay, like in verse 32, for instance, in this particular story, it says, "The angel of the Lord said to him, 'Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? I have come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me.'" Okay, in this particular line, note that the angel is, of course, speaking to Balaam, and he is saying that, "Hey, I'm your adversary," or "I am your Satan," in this sense. And again, Satan, in this particular sense, is not spelled out as a proper noun. It's not capitalized. Okay, and this is actually the first instance that we have a celestial being or an angelic being that is a loyal servant to God or Yahweh, however you want to address him, and follows God's command without question. Also, the word perverse here in this particular verse is used to show uncertainty. So in other words, what is being said is, in other words, God was uncertain how Balaam would have reacted had he appeared to him by another means. So he sent this angel in his stead for him. Thus, if you wanted to look at it that way, the verse would actually read, "I have come out to you as an adversary because your way is uncertain before me." He didn't know what type of reaction Balaam would have provided or would have given had he come out, by another means. Okay. Also note that as we move on in the Old Testament, because this is again what we're still dealing with, there is a bit of a change to the word Satan, and it becomes ha-śaṭan, so H-A-S-A-T-A-N, and this literally means in translation, the Satan. Okay, but again, this doesn't denote a proper noun as an individual. It doesn't show that they're speaking about actual Satan at this point. And again, in Hebrew text in the Old Testament, again, as I pointed out in part 1, there is no Satan to begin with. Okay, Hebrews generally don't believe in Satan. Okay, they've always seen that everything is done through God. Okay, creation, destruction, good and evil. And for those that want, that you didn't catch the first video to this, look up Isaiah chapter 45, verses 2 through 4, 2 through 5, and you'll get that meaning as to that. So the next part that we come to is the story of Job. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the story of Job and how God brags about how Job is one of his loyal worshipers. Okay, during this particular story, the usage of ha-śaṭan actually appears a total of 7 times. And again, I'm not going to go into great length regarding, as far as like providing the actual verse at this point, because it's actually longer than the Numbers 22 that I just quoted. But I will end up providing that particular chapter and those verses regarding this particular story in the video there. So of course, ha-śaṭan challenges God to let him lay waste to Job's property, livestock, and family, believing that Job is only loyal to God due to his good life and what he's received up to this point. So as the story progresses with Job, we see that ha-śaṭan, or this Satan, is still only an adversary to Job at this point, and is very far from what Christianity would actually refer to as actual Satan. Again, ha-śaṭan is presented here in the story as a member of God's court and has a very specific role to fill within God's court. Okay, so that is where some of the confusion lies in the story, because when you read some of the Bibles of today, how they're written, it says that Satan had appeared, and Satan is asking, for permission to do all these things to Job, and God is saying, well, you can only do this, but you can't strike him down. And people are saying, aha, that's God's way of saying that I have power over you, Satan. And that's really not what the story, that's really not what is being portrayed here. Of course, a lot of modern day Christians will want to say that that's what it is. It is simply, this is a member of God's court. Again, he has a very specific role to fill. He is a role of the accuser. In this case, ha-śaṭan is the accuser, and I'm going to get into a little bit more on that in just a bit, especially in my conclusion. Okay, and God is asking him to perform a specific duty by a specific means. And of course, the angel, this is actually an angel doing this, is following what has been laid out for him. Okay. And again, there is no actual biblical Satan to at this point. Okay, this is not the New Testament. Okay, where you see the usage of Satan or the devil fairly regularly. Okay. I also want to point out that in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible that I used here for this particular thing, while it does say Satan in the actual verses, because I believe that it was put in there through a mistranslation or a misunderstanding of the actual text, and again, everything will be covered in my conclusion. It does read, for every mention of the word Satan, there is a footnote that reads, or the accuser, Hebrew, ha-śaṭan, next to each word. Okay, so again, I'll be covering that in just a little bit, so you're just going to have to keep your pants on and kind of hold off for just a bit. The third passage that we get to is Zechariah chapter 3. Okay, and in this particular verse, which I will include on screen, I'm covering verses 1 through 4. Again, I generally end up typically including more verses than in other instances, because some people will simply want to quote like one particular verse, and sometimes I think that they misunderstand that one verse for what it really means. So I'm trying to include additional passages here so that, again, you can go back and review those passages yourself if you'd like to. Okay, but also to give you a more clear role as to what is actually being discussed at the time. Okay, so in this passage we have a recount of the vision of Joshua, who sees himself standing before the heavenly court to be judged on his ability to serve as the high priest of Jerusalem. And in this vision, Joshua is, of course, wearing dirty clothes, which is an indication that the trial is nearing an end. And again, ha-śaṭan is able to make valid points against him, but God finds Joshua in favor and rebukes ha-śaṭan and removes the dirty clothes from Joshua, thus removing his guilt. Okay. Now, as we look at this particular story, ha-śaṭan's role is to play God's accuser, and this is actually the first time we have an instance in the Bible where the actual accuser that we have called Satan is an actual direct adversary to God or to Yahweh. Okay, so Zechariah chapter 3, beginning with verse 1, it says, "And then he showed me the high priest Joshua standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan." Okay, and again we have a footnote here that says, or the accuser, Hebrew, for Hebrew, the adversary. Okay, after each mention of the word Satan, which is mentioned 3 times within these particular verses. Okay, so again, the angel of the Lord and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, again, footnote, okay, the accuser or the adversary in Hebrew, "The Lord rebuke you, O Satan," for the 3rd time. "The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a brand plucked from the fire?" Now Joshua was dressed with filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. The angel said to those who were standing before him, "Take off his filthy clothes." And to him he said, "See, I have taken your guilt away from you, and I will clothe you with festal apparel." Okay. Again, this is very hard-pressed. I find it very hard-pressed or even believable that up to this point, God would even allow actual Satan in his court to be accusing anybody for anything, even to pass accusations, especially since by this point, if we consider biblical history, for that matter, he had already been presumably cast out of heaven by this time, and again, as we see in the story with Job, ha-śaṭan is simply is translated into the accuser or the adversary after each mention of the proper word Satan here. Okay, the final celestial entity that is referred to as Satan is seen in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, and this begins to tell the story of David and his census within his kingdom. And this story is actually similarly found in 2 Samuel. Okay, the only difference between the census and 2 Samuel is that in 2 Samuel, it's David's idea to conduct a census of his kingdom. Okay, he sends his army out to count all the heads within his kingdom. And what he's actually particularly trying to find out is how many heads in the kingdom can wield a sword, okay, in this particular instance. Okay, God becomes angry of this. God sends an entity referred to as ha-śaṭan, the destroyer, to cause pestilence over David's kingdom for 3 days' time. Okay, I also want to point out that in some biblical cases, the word for the entity ha-śaṭan, or the name of the entity, is sometimes omitted, and the word angel simply appears instead. So it would read that God sent out an angel to cause pestilence in the kingdom. Okay, but again, the difference between that and 1 Chronicles chapter 21 is that Satan is suggested that Satan incites David to take the census. There's slight differences between the two. I will provide both of those differences at the end of this video, okay, that you could go ahead and review. I'm not including all parts, of course. Mainly, I'm including particular verses, and in order to kind of fill in some of the details so that you understand what's going on, in case if you haven't read some of these verses to begin with in the past up to this point. Okay, so I also want to make a note that at this point in 1 Chronicles, the use of Satan in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible does not contain a footnote as to referring to the accuser or the adversary, which may note, which may present that this is actually a proper usage, for that particular time period, or more appropriately, the way that it was used in the time of rewriting or translating of the text when it happened. Okay. Understand that through all this, we have to understand that between the Old Testament writings and the New Testament writings, there's actually a period of what is referred to as intertestament period. Okay, there's a gap between the writings of these two books, okay, or these two versions of, or the old and the new, and it's a gap of about 300 to 400 years. Okay, so we're seeing a very large proportionate amount of religious writings that come out of this period, and a lot of these writings, particularly, are apocalyptic writings to begin with. Okay, and this particular period runs between 332 before Common Era to 62 before Common Era. Okay, so for a long time, there wasn't a lot of things being written. Okay, and then all of a sudden, we see a flood of all these religious writings coming all at once, and being presented. Understand that this is also a period in which the Greeks were invaded by Rome, which kind of causes a lot of disruption in the land at the time. This causes a diminishment of Jewish control over their own lands around Jerusalem and surrounding areas. The Jewish population is divided. Roman occupation leads a major assault on Jerusalem. There's a great famine against the Israelites during this time. And we even see the destruction of the Second Temple, which actually happens in 70 Common Era. Okay. Understand that obviously when all this devastation is going on, that there seems to be a development that takes place where Satan actually becomes a proper name, okay, and emerges into the New Testament as God's adversary. And again, you have to remember that, we mentioned in the beginning, according to the Hebrews, there is no proper use for the name Satan, okay? It simply just denotes as accuser or adversary. And it was like that for centuries, okay? However, in recent times, I'm not saying, by recent, I'm not saying within the 20th century, but in, I'll say, recent centuries, some Hebrew sects have actually emerged and do accept the idea of there being an actual Satan. So there's actually kind of some middle ground there, okay? Why they favor the idea with Christianity, I'm not certain, okay? But the idea of an actual Satan appearing in the Bible didn't really actually make its way until the Middle Ages, and this is really just a rough estimate, okay? Now you have to understand that the Middle Ages spans roughly over a thousand years, okay, from 427 Common Era to 1482 Common Era, okay? So if 476 makes a point of history when the Roman Empire fell, which is about that time, okay, Rome falls, local kings amongst Egypt and, I'm sorry, not Egypt, Europe and other areas that were normally under Roman rule now fall to local kings and rulers who are going through power struggles during this time. That's why we call it the Middle Ages, or sometimes some people refer to the first 500 years of the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages, okay? So there's a lot of power struggle, there's a lot of fighting for control going on during this time. And then we end, in 1482, where Leonardo da Vinci, is painting the Last Supper on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So, now there are a couple instances where the term Satan have been used in a proper text. However, I also want to point out to you that these particular books don't appear in the actual Bible, okay? And unless if you have some obscure Bible version that I'm not familiar with, books such as books of Enoch 1, Enoch 2, the life of Adam and Eve, they don't appear in any proper Bible, okay? In fact, Hebrew and Christian canon doesn't actually recognize them as actual books of the Bible. So they're not included. However, I am kind of discussing some of that here just to kind of fill in a little bit more as far as how, or the use of Satan is used in context for the particular situation. Now, I've already covered the four celestial angels or beings that have been referred to as Satan, and I've explained that. In the life of Adam and Eve, we have the story that tells of Adam and Eve after being expelled from the Garden of Eden, but with some slight changes, of course, okay? What was once referred to as a serpent in the garden that tempted Eve to eat the fruit, we now have the word Satan proper, okay? And again, this is probably more based upon like around the time of when this particular book was written, or it was just simply mistranslated. I believe it was mistranslated or misunderstood by whoever did the translation, and they weren't understanding what the word Satan meant in Hebrew. Okay, so I think that's kind of like where they were going for at the time. Okay, remember that a lot of people have the common assumption that, of course, that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan. However, Hebrew scriptures sometimes actually say that the serpent was actually Lilith in this sense, and not Satan himself. However, if you read the book of the life of Adam and Eve, it does say, actually it doesn't say Satan in that particular book. It says the devil, as opposed to Satan there. And it says that, he caused her to, eat the fruit, therefore creating the situation that they were in at that point. Okay. But if you read the actual part of Genesis, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, it says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?' The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said we shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall we touch it, or we shall die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and that you will be like God.'" And there is a footnote here. Okay, knowing good and evil. The footnote in this particular verse, which is verse 5, and when it says, "and you will be like God," the actual footnote, or the actual word that was used in this particular sentence was, "and you will be like gods." Okay, plural, Gods. Okay, knowing good and evil. Okay, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Now, she didn't force it upon him. It doesn't say that, she tied his ass down and said, "Eat this fucking apple." He actually took it, okay? And I know that we like to say that, Eve forced it upon him, but no, he obviously knew what he was doing, okay? And then it goes on to Genesis 3:12. "The man said, 'The woman whom you gave to me with me, she gave me the fruit from the tree, and I ate.' Then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is it that you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent tricked me, and I ate.'" I don't really see there'd be any form of trickery here. The serpent was merely telling Eve at this point, "If you eat of this fruit, you will be enlightened. Okay, you will know all things. You will know good. You will know evil. You will know that you're naked. You will know of all things, and you will partake of that knowledge, and be like God, or be like gods." Okay, So there's no trickery here. Okay. Okay, we also find that in part of the life of Adam and Eve, how Satan and his followers were already cast out of heaven by this point, and was because of their refusal to worship God and Adam as they were commanded. Okay, so again, as I noted in that particular book, the word devil is used to describe Satan as opposed to Satan proper. For those of you who are interested in reading that particular book, I will have a link in the description below as far as to where you can, read those particular verses if you don't have access to that particular book itself, within a Bible or something like that. Okay. Okay, we also see similar things in 1 Enoch. Again, 1 Enoch and 2 Enoch, they're not considered canon in a lot of books, unless if you have something like the King James Version of the Bible. Again, 1 Enoch, which was roughly written between 200 BCE and 60 BCE, simply expands on the ideas that angelic beings known as watchers, and this is as a reference from the Book of Daniel, chapter 4, and tries to connect them with rather obscure accounts of Genesis, and it really doesn't do a very good job. Okay, in Genesis, we have angels that descend to earth and produce with human women. Okay. In 1 Enoch chapter 7, it states that a group of lust-filled watchers under the leadership of Azael, okay, which is Azael, okay, descended to earth to mate with human women. This creates a race of giants called Nephilim, who brought demons into the world. Because of this treachery, God casts all the perverse watchers into what is termed the fiery pit. The word hell really isn't used at all in this particular situation. Okay, now don't confuse this name, Azael, with Azazel, okay? Or don't confuse it with Azrael, the angel of death, okay? I spent a little bit of time looking this up. The name Azael really didn't come up to a point, and every time that I selected on something that said it was referring to Azael, it took me to Azazel. Okay, we know Azazel is to be different. Okay, Azazel appears in association with what is termed as a scapegoat, right? Okay, this name represents a desolate place where a scapegoat bearing the sins of the Jews is sent during the Yom Kippur, which is also referred to as a Day of Atonement. Okay, it's the story of the two goats, where one is, I forget what the other one goes for, but one is sent out into the wilderness as a scapegoat, basically bearing the sins of the Jews, and basically that's meant as an offering to the wolves, or the wild animals, to take as an offering. Okay, that individual is not the same as Azael, okay, and is not Azrael, okay. However, I did do a little more digging, and in the dictionary Infernal, it does mention that the demonic angel Azael is chained in a desert, and he will be there until the day of judgment. Okay. Additional information brings up Cornelius Agrippa, who also talks about Azael, listing him as one of the 4 evil angels who represent the opposites of the 4 divine elements. Okay. And in the vocabulary d'angelology, Okay, basically it's the Encyclopedia of Angels, based on the papers of Hebrew manuscripts in the National Library. Basically, is what the translation is. I don't want to butcher up all the French there. Anyways, in that particular book, Schwab describes Azael as the guardian of hidden treasures. Okay. However, in a slightly different account of 1 Enoch chapter 7, it does mention that Azael is in a group of angels led by Samiaza, okay, Samiaza, Samiaza. So Samiaza is actually the leader of the group, okay, not Azael at this point. And here the two angels are actually mentioned as being Nephilims, okay, but this is actually a mistake. These two angels are not Nephilim to begin with, okay. And this discovery was actually found, and the mistranslated was corrected and whatnot. I'm not certain when that was done. All I know is that, whoever ended up studying or looking at that text, said this is a mistake, and the correction was made. Okay, so don't ask me further on who did that or when or whatever. But if we continue to the end of 1 Enoch, we find that Azael's name is actually changed to Satan proper, thus showing that there is to be an adversary that truly has a power to go against God's and his will. Okay, so similar to 1 Enoch, we have the Book of Jubilees, which again is written during 160 BCE to 140 BCE. In this version, again, a group of watchers is sent down to earth to teach justice and righteousness to mankind. The leader of the group decides to abandon this command, and as in 1 Enoch, they mate with human women, again creating a race of Nephilim. However, this time, when the demonic spirits come into the world, most of the watchers are cast into the fiery pit. Again, it uses not the word hell. However, God does allow the leading angel of the group to retain some of his followers in the aftermath of this judgment. Okay. And again, in 2 Enoch, which again, as we know, is not proper canon, it pulls from previous stories of within Isaiah and Ezekiel, describing what people refer to as well-known stories of Satan within the Bible at that point. Okay, so we have in Isaiah 14, verse 12. Okay, if you read just that particular verse, okay, it says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn? How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low." Okay, a lot of people like to look at this particular verse and they see the word, "O day star, son of dawn," and they immediately think of morning star. Okay. And let me get to that in just a moment here. Okay. Here, some would say that this is actually in reference to Sargon, king of Assyria at the time, as he is sometimes referred to as the king of Babylon. Okay. He did rule between 710 BCE to 707 BCE, but Sargon isn't referenced here at all. Okay, Sargon doesn't even become referenced in Isaiah until chapter 20, verse 1. Okay, who they are actually referring to in this case is an actual reference to Nebuchadnezzar II, who is known as the greatest king of the Chaldean dynasty of Babylonia. Okay, he did conquer Assyria and Palestine, and he made Babylon a splendid city. Okay. In addition, he also destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem and initiated the Babylonian captivity of the Jewish population. Okay. His actual rule was between 605 before Common Era to 562 before Common Era, and it is this particular version that is often referred to as Day Star or Morning Star. Okay. So from the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, verses 3 through 23, it speaks of the downfall of the king of Babylon, which is Nebuchadnezzar II. Okay. If we look at Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 17 through 18, it says, "Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I expose you before the kings to feast their eyes on you. By the multitude of your iniquities in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profane your sanctities, so I brought out fire from within you. It consumed you, and I turned you to ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you." Okay. Let me point out to you folks that this is not a direct reference to Satan proper. Okay. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 1 through 10 talks about the proclamation of the king of Tyre, okay? While in verses 11 through 19, we have the lamentation over the king of Tyre, okay? In this case, the king of Tyre is also known as Hiram, who is sometimes called Hiram or Aram, and is a Phoenician king of Tyre. His reign was between 969 BCE to 936 BCE. Okay, and he appears in the Bible as an ally to the Israelite kings David and Solomon. Okay. Again, this has nothing to do with what Christians term as or refer to as what they call the biblical Satan here, okay? Satan is supposed to be, or at his fall, okay, was a high-ranking officer in the cosmic army of God, or which is referred to as the scapegoat or the angelic hosts, which was an aid to the followers. With aid of his followers, he attempts to overthrow the kingdom of God to gain his own power. When the rebellion fails, he is cast out of heaven and is said to fall endlessly over the bottomless pit. This passage from Isaiah is similar actually to a Canaanite myth about an ancient rebellion led by Day Star or Morning Star. Okay, so this is actually from a myth that actually comes from a couple thousand years before the actual this actual event is being written. Okay, which means that they pulled the myths from somewhere else. Okay, it basically really didn't happen, okay, at all within the times that this particular book was being written for the Bible. And I'm going to get into that in another video altogether, okay? But to kind of move along here, I also want to point out to you that the word or the name Morning Star, again, some people like to refer to as a popular name for Satan. However, Morning Star is not a popular name for Satan, okay? Because people, especially Christians, like to class Satan and Lucifer as one individual, and that's really not the case here. There are actually two different individuals here, okay? The name for Lucifer is actually light bringer, okay? Not Satan and not morning star. Okay, and as we learned again in part 1 and part 2, Satan is a Hebrew term that means the adversary or the accuser. So by all accounts, to be proper, we could say that Lucifer is a Satan or an adversary in this sense, but is not actually Satan proper, okay? Additionally, I just want to point out that at that particular time in history, actual accounts that astrologers and astronomers have at the time, I want to point out that the planet Venus is also referred to as the morning star. And if you want to, you can look that up. Do your own research on that. Yeah. So I kind of just want to jump back just a little bit here, and I'm going to be drawing my conclusion and, pretty much closing up here probably in the next couple of minutes. So, just to kind of close it out here, I got a few things to do before I hit bed, and I have to work tonight. Okay. So again, the Book of Enoch, the first book of Enoch is thought to be written around 2 Common Era, though some accounts state it was written as early as 2 before Common Era, so the 2 BCE, which I actually find kind of fantastic because that would mean that it was actually written a full 2 years prior to the crucifixion of Christ, which is in 1 Common Era. Okay. Now, also let me point out to you that there are 3 separate books to the Book of Enoch, okay, and the only reason why there are 3 separate books is scholars merely want to be able to distinguish them from one another, okay? Book 3, Enoch, refers to accounts that are unrelated to the first 2 previous books. Book 2 is thought to be written around 7 Common Era and is often referred to as the Slavonic Enoch or the Secrets of Enoch, and describes the ascent of the patriarch Enoch, which is an ancestor of Noah, through the 10 heavens of an earth-centered cosmos. Okay, I'm not going to get into a whole spiel about that. Okay, but basically, the only people that have the second book of Enoch in their Bibles are the the Slavonic Church, okay, which actually comes from an earlier Greek version. So I'm not even going to cover any more on that because, again, we don't see that as canon in normal Christian and Jewish texts. Okay. And the Book of Enoch only appears, the first book itself actually only appears in the King James Version Bible, and for some, though, however, this is still a widely used version Bible. There are some Puritans and Presbyterians and Methodists and even some fundamental Christians to this day that use the King James Version Bible as opposed to any other popular versions out there, okay? But before I get off track, I want to cover let's see here. Yep, I already covered that. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit there in my bantering there, but I kind of covered everything that I wanted. So, the very idea that the New Testament Christianity brings an adversarial being such as Satan to the center stage, well, in all honesty, the development of Satan is actually a gradual process. It does take hundreds of years for it to kind of make its way into the books. And as the Book of Revelations is in the New Testament has it, Satan will fall to God at the end of time. Okay. I want to point out to you who are listening that in American society in itself has been heavily influenced by Christianity. Okay, Christianity is one of the only religions I could think of that forces their beliefs upon people who aren't even people of their own following or religious affiliation. They want to tell us what we need to believe or how we need to believe or how we should live or whatever. Okay. Just because that is doesn't mean that it's right. Okay. Now, some of you are aware of my personal habits. I watch a lot of Gaia.com, and I personally enjoy a lot of programming on that particular site. There's a lot of interesting topics on there. But one of the video series that I've watched has to do with, it talks about the origins of mankind. And for some of us who are aware of Michael Tillinger, he explains the concept that every time a race or society goes to war or fights in a war or has a conflict, okay, there is a percentage of their history that is lost. Okay, and this actual percentage that society loses, he says is roughly about 50% of their history. So imagine that you have a war. Okay, war brings all kinds of devastations. Okay, you have plagues, you have famines, you have death, buildings are destroyed, buildings of historical significance are destroyed, buildings that house historical artifacts and literature, they're often destroyed, books are burned, either purposely or accidentally, information is lost. People who are seen as teachers and scholars and professors and leaders of various groups and lines are sometimes killed, they're lost, and their teachings are scattered, so on and so forth. Okay, a lot of things happen during that type of stuff. So if you have one war 1 year, that means you go from 100% of knowing what your history is to only knowing 50% of your history. Again, because information gets lost, it gets destroyed, people are killed, so on and so forth. So add this up over all the years. Okay, if you consider that there's, we'll say, to the farthest stretch, 400 years between the writing of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then you have another 300, then Jesus is crucified in one common era, and then you have another over 300 years of where you're a Christian and you're just being persecuted and you're on the run all the time. Okay, war and war, upon conflict. By the time that 6 wars have gone by over a period of time, a society is only going to remember about 1.5% of their actual history. Okay. And then, you can even, again, you have another war, you only have about, you're only going to know about like 0.7%, of, or I'm sorry, 0.07% of, your history. And then add another war on top of that, 0.035%. It's like you're just losing information at that time. Okay. So, again, you have to remember the Greeks were invaded by the Romans during this time. The Hebrews are scattered. Everything's happening. Generations of information and people are being lost and scattered. And, so many atrocities are going on that it's probably not too far conceived that early Christians at the time had to explain away the evil or the happenings of the time, okay? They probably didn't even have access to actual people, that, I'm talking like Hebrew scholars and whatnot, that may have actually understood the actual meaning of the word, the proper use of the word Satan in the Old Testament. And when you take on that, plus the fact that during the Roman occupation, the Roman occupation of Europe and Jerusalem and Middle East and stuff like that, you have people speaking Latin, you have people speaking Greek. Some words don't translate properly from one language to another. Certainly people who are traders and scholars and whatnot probably speak both languages. But again, things get lost in translation. So a modern day approach of a Satan would be something like this. Okay, if you're an individual, say you're a member of a group or a part of a religious group, Christian, and you're protesting, say, something like abortion rights, okay, you and your group are considered a Satan, okay? You are an adversary to those in favor of having said abortion rights. Yes, you didn't hear me incorrectly. I said if you're Christian and you are protesting something, again, and I'm using abortion rights as the example here, okay, you oppose you oppose someone's rights or oppose a point of view or idea or policy or position, you are an adversary to them. You are a Satan to their cause, even if you are a Christian. Okay, you need to understand that. I'm going to let that sink in for just a moment. Okay, so anyways, moving on. Again, early Hebrews saw their God as both light and darkness. Remember back to the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 7. I form light and create darkness. I make weal and woe. I, the Lord, do all these things. Okay? And okay, at the end of the New Testamental period, Christianity was still, at best, an emerging religion at that point. Okay? A great deal of their, okay, and as I covered this already, a great deal of their scripture and their literature history is lost due to warring tribes and societies of the time. Okay, Christianity really did not become a religion until the first century Common Era. Okay, and that's again when Jesus died and was claimed to be resurrected. Okay, but again, Christianity later becomes the favorited religion of Rome, but that's not until 313 Common Era. Okay, that's over 300 years after the emergence of Christianity and after the crucifixion of Christ. Okay, until then, Christians had their very, very, very fair share of problems. Okay, again, you had to conduct your religion in secrecy. Between one Common Era and two Common Era, if you professed your religion to be Christian, you could and often be met with execution by the hands of the Roman Empire. Okay, this is often done through beheading. Okay, if you said, "Hey, I'm a Christian," they just took you out to the town square and they behead you. There wasn't even in most cases, it wasn't even a trial run. It's, oh, okay, you're Christian. Well, let's go chop your head off. Okay, that was the case. They didn't wait on it. Okay, however, in some cases, okay, we do want to note that into Common Era, the Apostle Paul was actually beheaded, okay, by that means. Um, exe- Other executions did involve being burned to death. You may have been crucified, and one that many of us may know of. You may have been be put to death by ferocious animals, and we've kind of heard that line. Who are these Christians? Feed them to the lions. That is actually Emperor Nero of the time, an early Roman emperor who would actually favor putting Christians in the fighting pits with animals, lions, tigers, bear. Oh my, and in some cases, to make it even more of a sport, they sometimes tied animal skins to the Christian that is being put in the pit, and then a ankle was chained, and so that they were remain stationary. They could basically run around in a circle, a very small circle. But then, that animal skin that was tied to them, they would release hungry dogs on them, and the dogs would basically tear them to shreds. Okay. I do want to point out, of course, also that the Emperor Constantine is the one that gave Christianity their right to openly practice their religion. And again, until then, they had to practice in secrecy. And again, that did not happen until 313 Common Era, where the Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which accepted Christianity. And roughly 10 years later, that became the official religion of the Roman Empire at that time. Okay, so let's see. We're going to skip ahead just a little bit. So as I've already stated, that through the passage of time, knowledge is lost, people are lost, buildings are lost, scriptures, writings, so on and so forth. People who don't understand, the writing at the time, or the meaning of certain words at the time, or they don't understand languages fully, they misinterpret something, they mistranslate something. And what I really feel is that Christians at that time were really looking to create a scapegoat or an adversary first versus God, because they couldn't or wouldn't even accept the very notion that their God was the sole responsible for the horrific tragedies of the time. Okay. Again, Book of Isaiah. I'm going to, go back to it. 45, verse 7. I form light and create darkness. I make weal and create woe. I, the Lord, do all these things. Okay. I really believe that Christians at that time, at that period of time within history, they did not, they didn't view that the way that the Hebrews did at the time. They couldn't accept the responsibility, or the possibility, I should say, that their God, Yahweh, was the one solely doing these things, and that individuals within his court were the ones doing the evil deeds, and following his command. So I believe that they wanted to create a scapegoat, okay, and the word Satan, or, in order to change the word Satan to a proper noun to denote an individual that could become an adversary, is what ended up coming out from all this. But I just want to point out really quick that all of this happens to have a silver lining for us because of Christianity. We now have a great number of egregores. Okay, and this is my discussion of egregores here in this part. Okay, to tap into. Okay, the very concept or idea of Satan, what Satan represents for those of us who are left-hand path practitioners, to even the inverted pentagram and many other symbols and symbolisms that Christianity may have come up with in the past to describe certain satanic practices and stuff like that. They have put so much energy behind creating this image of Satan and creating and perversing certain images that we literally have a magnitude, or like we have a great amount of energy that we can tap into for any ritual need, for any ritual practice that we want to perform. Okay. Now, for those of us who are not familiar with the term egregore, simply put, an egregore is a thought form. Okay, this thought form is usually created by a group, but individuals can also create them. It can be created either intentionally or unintentionally and becomes an autonomous entity with the power to influence. A group with a common purpose, like a family, a club, a political party, a church or religion, Christianity, okay, or a country, can create an egregore for better or worse, depending on the type of thought that created it. Okay. If we look at some writings from the late Madame Blavatsky, okay, she writes that every thought so evolved with energy from the brain creates willingly or unwillingly a shape. Okay, and she continues by stating that such a shape is absolutely unconscious unless it is the creation of an adept who has a preconceived object in giving it, thus a thought form, consciousness, or rather the appearance of consciousness derived from the adept's will and consciousness. Okay, so people create thought forms all the time, and especially those who aren't even involved in occult practice, and a lot of them are very unconscious of what they're doing. Okay, in his article "Understanding the Occult: What is an Egregore?" Theron Dunn offers 4 definitions of what egregores are. I'm only going to read one of them in particular. Okay, one of the 4th definition being an egregore is an angel, sometimes called watcher in Hebrew. Okay, let me start that over again. An egregore is an angel, sometimes called watcher. In Hebrew, the word is Ir, I-R, okay, and the concept appears in the Book of Enoch. Thus, Irim, the city of the Nephilim, is again linked with the Book of Enoch, since the Nephilim, according to that book, were the sons of the Irim, the egregores, although the Irim, the egregores, are angels on both sides of the camp, fallen angels as well as faithful ones. Okay. Finally, the author Gaetan Della Forgam states that the egregore will continue as long as thought energy feeds it, but it doesn't have to be the same people feeding energy for the entity to continue and eventually become independent. Okay. Egregores can be kept alive when new generations add their thought energy to the entity. Okay. Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the spirit of Christmas, are all egregores, as are the devil and the grim reaper. Okay, I'm stating that that is what the actual author has actually quoted, like, within that particular writing. Okay, so again, Christianity has given the occult community, notably left-hand path practitioners, perhaps its greatest ally and asset. Okay, they have fed this energy source, literally this egregore, over 2,300 years, and it has accumulated power. And we, as occult practitioners, can actually literally tap into that power for any reason and for any purpose. Okay. While Christianity wanted to create a scapegoat to explain away what was happening in the world, they simply did not understand that what they were doing was actually giving us our greatest assets. Okay. And that is actually their own downfall, for all intents and purposes. Okay, so that is actually going to conclude this video. Wow, I didn't expect that one to go as long as it did. But with that, folks, again, I will link in the description below the BibleGateway.com if you want to go check out the particular Bible verses I am referring to. And I will also include a link to the book of the life of Adam and Eve if you want to go check out those verses that I will be quoting in the video itself as well. All right, and with that, folks, I do bid you a very fond day. I do need to finish some editing here and get a little bit of sleep before I head into work tonight. So I bid you a very fond farewell. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.